This was the end, or more like the beginning of the end. The beauty wasn't sure about anything anymore, but her gut told her she couldn't back down now. Actaeon's second awakening had begun, and that spelled nothing but trouble. The room was full of control stones, but they couldn't contain the young man's power and were shattering. The sounds of explosions tore at the girl's soul, and common sense screamed at her to get out of there. But she couldn't leave Actaeon alone with his pain and just walk away. So she clung to his shoulder like a lifeline, hoping he'd snap out of it. It wasn't helping much, but the girl didn't give up, even though the crystals were mercilessly digging into her body. She had less and less strength to endure and fight for both of them. But at some point, Actaeon heard her. The guy knew he needed to pull himself together, but it was proving to be incredibly difficult. That's when the blonde knew it was time to kick things up a notch. But she was drawing a blank, and if she bailed, Actaeon would be toast, and she'd carry that guilt. Then her eyes landed on his ruby brooch. It was an out. Too bad she noticed the damn thing. It was too late to run. Yeah, and it'd be a real tragedy if she died saving him. Then Hyacinth would be all alone and hate Actaeon with every fiber of his being. And Actaeon's life would become even more of a living hell than it already is. So, he had to hear her and snap out of it now. But nothing happened. This was the last resort, and she really didn't want to do it, but she had to. A kiss, that's what she was going to do. But if Actaeon started demanding she take responsibility for it, she'd personally rearrange his face. And after a long, drawn-out second, their lips met. Turns out, in this fantasy novel, there's this cool concept of awakened ones. Some of them discover they have this totally unexpected magical gift. But then you've got the guides, who can keep these espers' magic from going haywire. Espers are prized in every country and used as weapons when things get dicey. The Kingdom of Valger's always on the lookout for these people, and after their first awakening, they're enrolled in a special academy. That's where they push them to their second awakening and train them up as either espers or guides. And the main character wasn't just rambling about all this, she actually got transported into the novel. And to make things worse, it happened right in the middle of her classmate's second awakening. As if that wasn't bad enough, she's supposed to bite the dust during the second awakening of a Class S Esper. And that Esper? It's Actaeon, the Duke's illegitimate son. Like a lot of romance novel leads, this dude's messed up, body and soul. And this whole trauma thing? It's not random. It all started after one seriously messed up event. He slowly starts losing it until one day, he spots this total stranger. Turns out the girl's name is Melia, and she's an S-class guide. Things get a little more than professional between them, if you catch my drift. Man, wouldn't it be great if that was the end of the story? Nope. The main villain is Lily's little brother, and he's out for Actaeon's blood because of what happened to her. Right then, the instructor noticed something was off with Lily. The girl was just spacing out, but then she wanted to clarify. Guiding's just holding hands, right? That's how it's supposed to be. But for some reason, the instructor told her to come to her immediately if she felt weird. Guides can't mess around with their health, especially since there are way fewer of them than espers, which means her body's property of the state, something else she can't forget. This novel's world was brutal after all, so Lily was glad she remembered everything and wouldn't die pointlessly again. After that less than pleasant event wrapped up, she decided to check the date and time, and what she saw on her bracelet wasn't good news. Actaeon was supposed to show up at the academy in 6 months. To avoid kicking the bucket, she needed to pull herself together and figure out her immediate goals. All right, first things first. She put in the paperwork for a leave of absence to head home. She was doing fine physically and mentally, but she really wanted to see her brother. After she woke up, Hyacinth was living alone, since they didn't have any other relatives. And after graduation, she'd be shipped off to the garrison, so this was her only chance to spend some time with him. The professor wasn't a total monster and let her take the leave. Lily didn't trust a word of the instructor's kindness, but she thanked her anyway. Just so you know, you're not allowed to do any guiding outside the academy walls. That bracelet will rat you out to the higher-ups. Lily knew that and promised to be a good girl. After their chat, she headed straight for the train station and hopped on a train headed to the county of Lorraine. On the way, she was brainstorming how to rewrite her fate in this story. Maybe she could just avoid all the danger zones from the start. Her brother, for example, was living with an aristocratic family as a potential awakened. The problem was, the Earl of Lorraine was a terrible guardian. He was basically bullying Hyacinth to try and force him to awaken. The Earl laid hands on the kid every day, while his own son just watched. That's what screwed him up psychologically and led him to make all the wrong choices later on. Eventually, he'll become a villain who operates from the shadows. Look, she didn't exactly love the Earl's family or anyone, but she didn't want Hyacinth to suffer his whole life. That's why she came to see her brother today, but they wouldn't let her in, saying everyone was busy. But this cute groundskeeper, totally charmed by Lily, was willing to find out about her brother for her. Good thing he thought she was related to the staff and was hitting on her. Otherwise, this could have gotten complicated. Besides, while the owners were busy, he was willing to show her around the mansion. Just gotta keep it on the down low, know what I mean? So far, so good, and the conversation was just small talk. The trouble started when Lily made up a name for her brother that the dude had never heard before. Still, the guy kept flirting, and even offered to guess Lily's name, even though she doubted he could. But she was totally shocked when the guy guessed her name had something to do with flowers. Suddenly, I was way less interested in playing this game, especially since the girl spotted something weird over by the gazebo. The guy tensed up immediately, saying it was just a training area and we were better off staying away. It was pretty obvious that's where the Count and his son were roughing up Hyacinth, calling it training. Lily wasn't about to stand by, so she ignored the groundskeeper and headed straight for the gazebo. A couple of minutes later, she reached her destination, and the scene that unfolded was horrifying. The Count was beating Hyacinth with a stick, clearly getting some kind of twisted pleasure out of it. The guy was a shadow of his former self. His hair was dull and brittle. His body was completely emaciated. Yeah, they taught all the guides at the academy to control their emotions, but right now, that control was hanging by a thread. So, she swallowed a special pill, feeling pure mana surge through her body. Just then, the Count sensed something behind him and turned around. Fear twisted his pretty boy face into something ugly. He had no freaking clue how an Esper ended up in his house. Good thing he hasn't figured out his mistake yet. And Lily was getting off on his fear and confusion. But Hyacinth knew right away that this was his sister. Meanwhile, Lily hit the guy, not too hard, but she hit him. Simple reason, nobody lays a hand on her brother. Now the Count's son was the one hurting. Honestly, the dude was fine. A little zap like that never killed anyone. And yeah, the Count was alive and bawling, 'cause it stung like hell. He even started begging Lily for mercy, just hoping she'd stop. That's when Hyacinth noticed his sister's wrist. The stone was glowing hot. The signal definitely reached the wardens. That meant they could throw her in the slammer, and her brother would have to survive alone. Just then, she saw the Count and his guards running towards them. Her rejected suitor ratted her out. The wardens surrounded the brother and sister. They'd picked up the signal about unauthorized magic use. Liliopa wasn't about to make excuses. She was ready to face whatever came next. But she had one request for the warden, the guy supposed to protect potential awakened ones. She wanted to file a formal complaint against everyone in Lorain County for abusing a potential awakened. On top of that, they systematically tormented and humiliated her brother. The Count wasn't happy about how things were going. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong. Besides, the girl attacked first and messed up his son. She's the one who should be locked up. The guards listened carefully to everyone, but stayed quiet. The guy understood Liliope had good reasons for what she did, but she still broke the law. Even so, the guard put the Count and his son under house arrest to investigate her complaint. If the Count's found guilty, he'll lose his title, go to prison, and maybe even face the ultimate penalty. After all, every potential awakened one was property of the state, not some individual's personal possession. But the Count clearly didn't know fear, since he went after something that belonged to His Majesty. Regardless, he had to take Liliope into custody. The girl didn't resist, but she felt like her brother was in a much worse situation, so she tried to calm him down, but it was no use. Dude was seriously freaking out. He could barely hear what his sister was saying. Lily was starting to lose it herself. And just like that, she blacked out. What Liliopa did might have looked dumb, but she'd thought it all through. Except things went sideways at some point, because the next thing she knew, she woke up staring at Isidore, the prince of this kingdom. The weird thing was, he started telling her how he could only become king after his older brother kicked the bucket. It made you wonder if he already knew that Hyacinth was his brother's kid. The guy was laughing, but he wasn't kidding around. He was curious about Hyacinth's supposed rank, even though you can't actually figure that out for potential awakeners. Izzard had heard about cases where this was possible, so he brushed off the girl's excuse. What's more, He was convinced that Hyacinth was exactly that kind of case. He tried to convince Lily that he wasn't going to exploit her brother, but just wanted to help him out. Liliopa wasn't really buying what he was selling. The prince continued, pointing out that the girl's actions were suspicious when she took time off and came to see her brother. It was entirely possible she found out he'd awakened as an Esper, which is why she rushed to his side. Plus, she knew the guy was getting a raw deal and figured if he lived with the Count, things would go from bad to worse. Liliopa herself is a B-rank guide, nothing special, but not exactly weak either. That's enough for most gigs. But her main goal lately has been protecting her brother. All in all, his words made sense. If Lily hadn't been a transmigrator who only cared about her own new life. Meanwhile, Izard announced he was switching Liliopa and Hyacinth to a new patron family. What's more, the Earl will be stripped of all his assets, some of which will go to Hyacinth, and the girl will be set free. That was great and all, but Liliopa's distrust of the prince wasn't exactly fading. Anyway, as soon as Izard leaves the room, a guide will come and take her to her new patrons. Brontiern isn't the worst option either, and way better than the Lorens. And then it hit Liliopa. They were talking about the Duke's family, the father of the main character, Actaeon. She wanted to scream, because she was supposed to die at the hands of this very family in the future. The prince left, and Liliopa was released. Suddenly, Hyacinth met her in the garden, looking much better. He was really worried about his sister, realizing that if it hadn't been for the prince, things could have gone south real fast. He was just being a grump, and it kinda stung, you know? He could have at least called her sis for appearances, but the guy was too caught up in his own head, freaking out about Lily. It all seemed so minor to him. Lily got it, though, and told her brother to chill, that she was fine. Their little moment was cut short by Blair, the butler from the Brontiern estate, who was there to escort them home. They didn't really have a choice, so the brother and sister followed the butler towards the Duke's mansion. The place wasn't just big, it was freaking huge, which meant the owner was rolling in dough. Now, Hyacinth was starting to understand what Blair had meant. He was stoked the kids weren't lugging a ton of crap he'd have to haul to the house. That's when Lily realized the butler was playing a game. He was smirking at her brother's sarcasm, confident he could break him. But there was no way in hell she was handing her brother over to this family willingly. So, her plan was to lull the Duke into a false sense of security, then ditch this country with her brother. Until then, she had to keep the big shots away from Hyacinth, especially Crown Prince Sibylline, because in the story, he deliberately got close to the kid after he lost his only guardian. He filled his head with garbage, seduced him with sweet talk of a place, and in the end, the kid bit the dust. Yeah, they've avoided him so far, but for how long? It'd be best to head to the academy together. And overall, it's not long until Hyacinth's first awakening, but it's not that simple. For that to happen, there needed to be a reason, a trigger. And then they walked into the house, and like clockwork, immediately ran into gloomy Actaeon. Blair immediately told him that the paperwork took longer than expected, so they were a little late. Lily, meanwhile, watched the guy, realizing he exceeded all her expectations. His movements and words were so calculated, and on top of everything, he was devastatingly handsome. If it weren't for their bleak future, Lily would have jumped his bones right then and there. But nah, that's just dumb. Basic politeness, though, that's still a thing. So she took the lead, introducing her brother and herself to Actaeon. Actaeon listened intently, but didn't say a word. He just told Blair to take them to their assigned rooms. That was pretty much the reaction Liliopa expected. They weren't going to be buddies, at least not yet. Hyacinth, on the other hand, wasn't feeling the cold shoulder. He didn't want to be stuck there. Hyacinth was about to start a fight when someone called out to Actaeon. How could Lily forget about him? And let's just say he wasn't exactly a ray of sunshine. Actaeon's older brother had just arrived home. Not only is he super sensitive, but he's constantly running his mouth and talking trash to everyone. But Milia manages to whip him into shape, so he gets attached to her like a puppy. Every word he spoke dripped with arrogant venom. He couldn't figure out why his brother was bending over backwards for the Ortis family. Actaeon, on the other hand, kept his cool and told his brother to get ready for dinner, because the Duke won't stand for it if his eldest son skips dinner, even if he doesn't want to hang out with their guests. The pause, like the staring contest, dragged on. Actaeon's brother cracked first, figuring that since their dad took Hyacinth under his wing, he must be destined for a high rank. But why Liliopa, whose Class B was in their house, he couldn't wrap his head around. The brother and sister exchanged glances. Neither of them liked this puffed-up aristocrat. The main character, though, understood that the Duke's sons were probably fighting for power in the duchy, since the heir here was determined by awakening rank. And let's not forget what happened to Claire, Cassiel's twin sister. Lilyhope thought Actaeon would lose it after that, but he kept it together, like nothing even happened. After a while, everyone gathered around the table. The Duke started by saying that His Highness predicted a great future for Hyacinth, and Lily tried to gently change the subject. But it didn't work, and the head of the house knew perfectly well that since the siblings were here, they needed help from a high-ranking Esper. At the same time, he wasn't exactly thrilled that Lily had to live in his house too. She didn't want to be there either, but the Duke was an S-class Esper, despite all the rumors flying around about his extracurricular activities. Usually, when an Esper and a guide get married, they imprint on each other. During this ritual, they can adapt their magic to the specifics of their partner's magic for ideal guiding. But there were downsides to all this. Guiding could only happen between partners in a couple. Ideally, yeah, but the Duke? He thought he was above it all. Never soul-bonded with the Duchess, and cheated on her to boot. Actaeon got caught in the crossfire of that mess, lost his mom, and spent his whole life looking over his shoulder at the Duchess. The Duke? He wasn't about to untangle the mess he made. His second son was just a tool to him, nothing more. He treated the Duchess just as badly. He stole her from her fiancé, then played around with whoever he wanted. No wonder he didn't like Lily. She looked like someone who'd weaseled her way into his family through her brother. All she really wanted was to get out of that house, but she had to keep up appearances. So, she said she was worried her lower rank might hurt the reputation of such a prestigious family. But her only goal has always been protecting her brother, no matter where she is. Anyway, she'll graduate from the academy in 6 months. Then it's off to the garrison. She'll be done with this place for good. And until then, for these next 6 months, she'll keep her head down. Her words made an impression on the Duke. He almost wished she was an A rank. But Hyacinth wasn't thrilled with what his sister said. Nobody paid him any attention, though. The Duke had said his piece and wasn't planning on schmoozing any longer. His wife would have stayed and chatted, but his impatient gesture made it clear it was time to bounce. This kind of thing was normal for that family, but Lilliape was still a little bummed. Once her parents were gone, Cassiel decided to chime in. The guy, being his usual charming self, pointed out that even though she'd been quiet until now, she was just playing nice to get ahead. Lily let the jab roll off her back, saying she really didn't like standing out. She tuned him out after that, figuring his bad attitude stemmed from the whole Claire incident. Claire was his fraternal twin, and the center of his whole world. She was too good of a girl. That's why she hated her power and having to kill. Time went on, she got worse and worse, and at some point her mind just couldn't take it and broke. Her power went out of control, and after taking out her guide, the girl died too, and Cassiel lost a piece of his soul. And Actaeon lost the only person who was ever kind to him, Irina, seeing him bite the dust with her own eyes. The pain changed the brothers forever. Liliopa was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Cassiel calling her name anymore. That's why obvious waves of anger and negativity were coming off of him now. And he wasn't hiding it, or his desire to kick the girl out of their house. Surprisingly, Lily thought the guy would start trying to get rid of her sooner. He actually held out for a while. But what she didn't expect was Hyacinth to openly clash with Cassiel, saying that for him, both families he ended up in were the same. Then he grabbed his sister's hand and dragged her out of the dining room. Cassiel and Actaeon just watched them go in silence. And while the older brother didn't really dwell on Liliopa's words, the younger one was mulling over a few things. Meanwhile, in the dark hallway, Hyacinth stopped. He wondered if Lily had deliberately pushed the Laurens this far. He couldn't believe that was the point, since now she's getting treated like dirt right in front of him. Because if things keep going this way, he won't want anything to do with this family. But the girl was sure her brother needed the Duke's support, and she didn't have to put up with the insults for much longer. Besides, her plan is to get Hyacinth enrolled in the academy within 6 months. The guy realized that's why she came for him, since she hadn't written a single letter before. And since things turned out this way, they're better off sticking together, not going it alone. My brother's got 3 months before he wakes up, so they'll figure things out. Hyacinth just needs to trust his big sister on this one. Seriously though, being an outcast in a place like this is old hat for her, but her brother needs to watch his back. Like we saw at dinner, the Duke's obsessed with rank, and he doesn't give a damn about people's lives. Hyacinth just needs a protector until he wakes up, but she doesn't want her brother to end up like the others, a casualty of this guy's schemes. So, the kid's better off staying out of this family's dirty laundry. Just then, Actaeon showed up in the hallway, having overheard their conversation. From what he heard, the guy figured Liliopa knew a lot more about this place than she was letting on. Things were getting weird, so she sent her brother upstairs and got ready to talk to Actaeon herself. The Duke's son was dying to know how she knew so much about their family business. He needed the truth, and he needed it now. The girl launched into a story based on rumors. Apparently, everyone at the academy was talking about a rank S Esper who died suddenly on the front lines. Some thought a new rank S monster was to blame for the tragedy. Others were convinced it was the work of assassins from another country, or even, well, that she did it herself. Liliopa filtered out the most ridiculous of the rumors, and then it was possible to draw a few plausible conclusions. Besides, she herself could end up in a similar situation. After all, she's not that old, and they're pushing her to the front lines to, deal with other people. Actaeon didn't quite follow her train of thought, since it's every awakened's duty to their country. And the story didn't really sound like an excuse, so he didn't recommend sticking her nose where it didn't belong. Yeah, Liliope wasn't buying it, because decent parents would never send their kid to the front lines under the guise of duty. But the Duke's not exactly decent, and even Actaeon's just spouting some canned lines about duty right now. It's different for her, though. Nothing's more important to her than her brother's safety. That's why she told him to stay out of the Duke and his family's business, so they can prepare for anything that might happen. Honestly, Actaeon got where she was coming from, so he apologized for losing his cool. Liliope needs to watch herself, though, because if the Duke or Cassiel overheard her, she could kiss her protection goodbye. But honestly, she couldn't care less. She wasn't about to bend over backwards in a place where they don't even treat her and her brother like human beings. Actaeon just ignored them. His dad and brother would trash-talk him at dinner, and even the maid was rude and wouldn't really help him out. This whole thing got to the guy, and he tried to explain his point of view to her. He was acting that way because he didn't want to get close to the girl and her brother. Not like with Aaron. That's when Liliopa realized he was probably talking about the guide who died, which meant he was scared she'd end up the same way as his friend, so he didn't want to form close relationships to avoid getting hurt later. You could tell it was getting harder for him to talk, so Liliopa suggested they stop. But it was too late, and Actaeon passed out. The girl didn't understand what was happening to the guy, why he basically collapsed on her. Then it hit her. The dude was showing the first signs of his first awakening. And that was a shock, 'cause Liliopa thought that wouldn't happen for a while, but guess she was wrong. The guy's condition was getting worse, but he was trying to hang in there, and asked her to call Blair. But Liliopa knew Blair couldn't help him. The guy needed a guide if he didn't want to, kick the bucket from a broken heart right then and there. So, she asked the guy if there was a guide in the mansion who could stabilize him. Actaeon was silent, which meant Liliope was the only guide in the mansion, and his life now depended on her. But the fear that she'd die right after him was paralyzing him, stopping him from using her powers. But things were really bad, and like they say, it was now or never. She couldn't think about herself when the person in front of her was suffering so much. She wasn't supposed to be guiding, and they could take her in for it. But they wouldn't lock her up for providing emergency aid, would they? The guy didn't expect her to decide to help him, putting her future on the line. But he shouldn't forget this day. So, the guiding began. Liliope was searching for the place where Actaeon's magic was tangled in order to unravel it. Except it wasn't magic. It was Actaeon's emotions. It was a cocktail of loneliness, isolation, a desperate need for human connection, and pure dread. Right then, Actaeon tried to break free, but no dice. He needed her guidance. Except something was off. Usually the emotions didn't sync up like this during the process. But hey, it is what it is, gotta deal with it. She managed to unravel the magic, but her own heart skipped a beat. Now Liliopa was fading out, not believing that the guy's heart had just sucked up her ability. In that instant, Actaeon knew he had to break contact with Liliopa, but she was gripping his hand tight. More than anything, he was terrified she'd kick the bucket, so he called for a medic. It was already morning when Liliopa finally came to. Hyacinth was fussing around near the bed. He was way too worried about his sister. And the reason was, the girl felt like absolute garbage. So first thing, he got her some water. Didn't exactly help, though. because when she saw Actaeon, she almost spit it all over him. She wasn't expecting that kind of surprise. And the guy didn't think anyone could react that wild. Plus, the girl had to know that guiding at that moment was a seriously bad idea. Liliope's problem wasn't clear. Things were critical, and there was no time to find someone else. And if she hadn't stepped in, Actaeon would be pushing up daisies right now. Hyacinth listened to their argument for a while, but then he jumped in, because only he got to worry about and be mad at his sister. Actaeon should just shut his mouth. They started a staring contest, which got on Liliope's nerves. And besides, she wanted to know what happened while she was out of it. According to Hyacinth, nothing interesting went down, which was weird, because the girl figured she'd wake up in solitary confinement, not her own room. This could have waited. Liliope needed to eat. She's been out of it for 2 days. Since no one was going to tell her anything, the girl figured she should eat first. But the tension in the air didn't ease up, and the room was way fancier than before. Had she become an aristocrat in the last 2 days? That sounded ridiculous. That's when Actaeon spoke up, wondering if she understood what he felt when she passed out in his arms. Liliope figured the guy probably panicked and was thinking about all the fallout, but everything turned out okay. But that wasn't quite right, and the guy didn't really need an apology. Liliope wasn't about to listen to any more accusations, but she wouldn't say no to a simple thank you. Plus, she was glad Actaeon looked healthy. She'd been scared that day too. And with good reason. HQ said he'd be a high rank, and during guiding, she could have ended up crippled or worse. Liliope kinda knew it, but she had no choice. The Duke would have unleashed hell on everyone if she'd just walked on by. Lost in her thoughts, Liliope didn't even realize Actaeon had kissed her hand and thanked her for saving him. That really ticked off Hyacinth, who didn't appreciate that guy hitting on his sister. But as soon as Actaeon left her room, she asked her brother to leave too. She needed to think. Okay, so this time she dodged a bullet, but the second awakening was coming, and what then? That's the big question. The novel said Milia had a late awakening, so during Actaeon's second awakening, she couldn't perform the guiding. So she needed to get support from another high-level guide to prevent a total disaster. The decision seemed right, but for some reason, Liliope felt really uneasy. Evening came, and the main character got an uninvited guest. Belladonna sent the Duchess to check on the girl's well-being. I wonder if Liliope jumped right out of bed to show respect to our guest. Out of nowhere, the guy throws her a curveball, asking if she's into quizzes. And even though she said no, he totally ignored her. He was dying to know if she could figure out who he was. At that moment, she thought he looked like a grown-up version of the Second Highness. The guy just kept pushing for the quiz, saying he was bored out of his skull. Okay, this wasn't rocket science. Judging by his looks, his manners, and his skills, he's probably either a doctor or a pharmacist. Liliope nailed it. He's a pharmacist, but he could get a doctor's license if he wanted to. After that, he handed the girl some medicine that would help her recover her strength. And it wasn't just any medicine, it was a souped-up Nexum. In these messed-up times, pharmacists were as valuable as guides, since they could create Nexum. Yeah, makes sense that even purified foreign magic could have nasty side effects, but that wasn't the case with enhanced Nexum. Besides, there were only 30 people in the whole kingdom who could even make the stuff. So Beld's a pretty big deal. The guy told Liliope to take it easy today, since people like her often don't listen, and then they end up with even more trouble. He left after that, which made the girl happy, because she wasn't doing as great as she was letting on. She was coughing up blood, so she needed to get better quick. But things didn't go as planned, and Liliope was out of commission for a week. And every morning, Beld would come to check on her, wondering why she was healing so slowly. Every day, he brought her a new medicine, and finally the day came when she felt amazing. Time to start moving forward. No sooner did she step out of her room than she overheard her brother and Actaeon arguing, voices raised. 1 second she was in blessed silence, and now this crap starts. She couldn't refuse her brother's offer to go for a walk, and then out of nowhere, Actaeon shows up with the same request. Not the best situation, when suddenly the young man asked her to wait a bit while he got the carriage ready. Thing is, Cassiel decided to go for a walk today too, but he's in a seriously foul mood. Interesting, though it's unlikely the guy has any interest in her. But if they cross paths, it's hard to guess how he'll react. Just then, she noticed Cassiel getting into a carriage. All right, that's done. Now Hyacinth and Liliope can finally go out for a stroll. Everything would be perfect. But Actaeon isn't backing down. He wants to tag along with them, claiming he has important business. And get this! Tons of people are heading out on errands today, so they better all pile into one carriage if they don't want to wait till nightfall. But this smooth move by our gallant admirer didn't impress Liliopa one bit. Sounded like a straight-up challenge to his fiery young heart. Meanwhile, Liliopa was already at the bank, where she just happened to bump into His Highness. The man was curious to hear all the juicy details about the little scrape the girl recently got into. Plus, the bank's pretty swanky reception area was perfect for a chat. Isidore had a point, I guess. But running into him just messed up her already shaky plans for the day. Before that, Actaeon joined her and her brother and declared that they'd all be heading home together too. No sooner did they arrive, and she walk into the bank, than the prince shows up out of nowhere. Good thing Actaeon and Hyacinth went their separate ways, 'cause if the three of them had met, it would have been a total disaster. Things are still kinda rough now, but manageable, though Isidore's really pushing her to spill the details about what happened. And that's on top of the fact that the guys already read the report about Actaeon's crazy first awakening and her guiding him. If she doesn't want to talk about it, she doesn't have to. I wonder, did she go to the bank for the promised compensation, or what? Liliopa didn't deny it. And if she thought Isard was done giving her a hard time, she was dead wrong. He was planning to take her out. His excuse was that he needed to know how the common folk live. Plus, thanks to him, she got some cash, so she kinda owes him dinner. What's more, the head chef who quit the palace opened his own restaurant, and they could totally check that place out. So it was time to bail. The dude was also hoping she wouldn't call him Your Highness while they were strolling around. Mr. Isidore would be just fine in this situation. Truth be told, the girl wasn't exactly thrilled, but nobody asked her anyway. Meanwhile, Isidore was playing the part of a lovesick aristocrat and his mistress, hitting the town. Yeah, that was a bad call, so the prince backed off. Just then, Liliopa remembered her brother and Actaeon waiting for her, hinting to the prince that she already had plenty of company today. Isidore pretended not to catch her drift. Meanwhile, Hyacinth was giving her the stink eye. He'd come to terms with Actaeon being around, but this was a bit much. First thing they did was all grab some grub. His Highness picked up the lunch tab, pretending he hadn't asked the waitress to do it for him. Liliopa figured the guy was after something, and she wasn't wrong. He wanted plenty. He hinted that he wouldn't let the awakened guy who acted on his own off the hook, even if her brother was high-ranking. Then he plastered on a fake friendly smile and headed on. And Liliopa suddenly realized she'd gotten mixed up in something weird. It was like Isidore was messing with her, but at the same time, everything he did was aimed at getting her on his side. The guy keeps pointing out that he helped her, but he doesn't use it as an excuse to make her do anything. As soon as the prince walked ahead, Hyacinth and Actaeon approached the girl. Actaeon told her to be careful with Isard. He's not as carefree as he seems, so he's gonna put in the effort to find out what His Highness is really after. Guess we could head to the cathedral in the meantime. But Actaeon tried to stop her, since his brother was also heading to the cathedral today. Even so, Liliopa was going to the cathedral right now, even if she wasn't exactly thrilled to see Cassiel. After a while, they arrived at the temple. Everyone knew that most people in this country worshipped the god of love and light, but they still use the awakened as weapons. People pray here for the families of those who've gone to war. They also hold final farewells for fallen soldiers here. It's a brutal sight, one you never really get used to. Liliopa and Hyacinth also lost their parents because of this cursed war. They grew up in a small town near the border, but when the war broke out, a powerful Esper's magic wiped their town off the map. Liliopa and Hyacinth were the only ones in their family who made it. To survive, she took any job she could get. That's when her powers first awakened, and she ended up enrolling in the academy. Hyacinth went to live with the Earl's family, and they got permission to put their parents' ashes in the cathedral. And today, they came to the cathedral together for the first time to see their parents. Actaeon was walking behind them, constantly looking around, probably searching for his brother. She was about to tell him to chill out a little when he suddenly got even more anxious. His reaction made sense when Cassiel showed up on the horizon, spitting angry words. Knowing his older brother wouldn't hold back, Actaeon decided to protect Liliopa. But Cassiel didn't give a damn, just kept trash-talking Liliopa. He wouldn't even listen when she said she wasn't at the cathedral because of their sister. At some point, Actaeon got sick of hearing all this garbage and told him he'd regret his words someday. Actaeon knew it firsthand. 'Cause people can get seriously hurt by stuff you blurt out without thinking. He'd felt like crap after saying things he regretted, and Cassiel was gonna feel even worse when it finally clicked. Just then, Izzard strolled up to them, cool as you please. The guy saw that Cassiel was stuck on his own pain, blind to the fact that other people were hurting way worse than him. And right now, he was only calming down because the big boss was talking to him. 'Cause if he was a B rank, that dude would be acting totally different, no question. Cassiel started making excuses. But the prince didn't care about that. He asked Liliopa why she came to the cathedral. The girl didn't want to get into it, but she answered that she and her brother came to visit their deceased parents' urn. Besides, she didn't understand why Cassiel thought he had the right to hurt others just because he was hurting himself. It's not like the guy ever had to eat rat stew or flee a burning city just to survive. And before that, lose his whole family. Every word pierced Cassiel's mind. He thought he was the only one in pain, that no one could understand his pain, but she understood, but tried to move on. And he couldn't. Plus, he didn't need to prove his sorrow to everyone around him. Everyone already respected and acknowledged it. And if you think about it, it's all pretty selfish of him. After that, Liliopa left, realizing that this was why she couldn't fall in love with Cassiel from the novel. After all, he needed tenderness and love to heal his wounded heart. Nah, she ain't like that. Her life's way too rough for any kind of softness. Liliopa was thinking, next time they gotta hit up that cathedral, just the two of them. The girl started wondering when would be the perfect date for another visit. But she didn't get to finish that thought, because she spotted Actaeon and Cassiel near the carriage. The vibe between those brothers was seriously tense. But the real kicker was Cassiel just straight up ordered Liliopa to get in the carriage, like, now. Hyacinth was like, where does he get off giving orders? I mean, a minute ago, this dude was disrespecting his sister. But the young guy's outrage didn't mean squat to Cassiel. He just straight up ignored him. But ignoring his own brother was a tougher call. Actaeon wasn't about to leave him alone with Liliopa, 'cause the guy needed to remember the situation he caused back at the cathedral. If he wants to apologize, he needs to ask the girl for permission first. But the guy just stood there, silent. So Liliopa took matters into her own hands. She started getting into the carriage and was surprised that the young man was standing there like a statue, not trying to get in. So she had to hurry him up so he'd sit next to her. Meanwhile, Actaeon silently watched the carriage drive away. Inside the carriage, Cassiel admitted he was wrong, that he's been using his past as an excuse to avoid everything. That was all well and good, but she wanted to hear a simple apology. This intro was dragging on way too long. Even so, she accepted his clumsy attempt at an apology, but asked him to tell her about Claire, which completely shocked him. Truthfully, she wanted to get some info about Irina, Claire's guide, but she didn't dare ask directly. Cassiel was tense, but he understood the curiosity of the person he was talking to. Basically, Claire was a prodigy who not only awakened her powers early, but also got an S rank. The thing is, after that, they sent her to the battlefield way too soon, and every day she suffered more and more from auditory and visual disturbances. They threw her onto the battlefield because she had immense power, but even seasoned soldiers had a hard time enduring that kind of torment. So, you can imagine what it did to the mind of an inexperienced girl who couldn't handle that kind of pressure. Cassiel understood now that even if you have monstrous power, it doesn't mean you're strong in spirit. Liliopa understood why Aren couldn't handle his task. Everyone knows that an Esper accepts external magical power with their heart and uses it. That's why guiding can deliver a controlled surge and stabilize the Esper's body. Except Claire's condition was caused by post-traumatic stress, not magical power, so Aren couldn't stabilize her. And that's because nobody in this world knew about psychological trauma. So the kid's apologizing to Liliope, but he's still got a serious beef with the guides. And this girl's plan to drag her own brother into hell? From his point of view, that's straight up bonkers. From the outside looking in, it probably seems that way, since she's the sister of a potential Esper, drawing attention from Isidore and Glock. But the real reason behind all this is way deeper, and it's easier for her to keep an eye on her brother this way. Right then, she realized that even if she saves Actaeon during his second awakening, that doesn't mean everything's gonna be sunshine and rainbows, because things can still go wrong. Is everything she's trying to do to change the future gonna fall apart? Is a major shakeup the only real answer? Except, She can't just snap her fingers and start a revolution out of thin air. Just then, she turned her attention to Cashel and said she'd already forgotten his hurtful words. In that moment, the girl figured she needed to get this guy on her side. So she started saying that, until they change the law, nobody can escape getting shipped off to the battlefield. The kid knew it himself, 'cause that's just how the system worked. And Lillipy thought he had every right to be pissed. She tried to explain that no guide was worth getting that worked up over. But it wouldn't be right to say the Esper was the only problem. Maybe the real issue ran deeper, like the whole Manastone War. Ending the war was the right thing to do. But there was no guarantee another one wouldn't kick off right after. So you could figure the real problem was the people sending miners to the front lines. Cassiel got spooked, 'cause the girl was saying some pretty dicey stuff, and she seemed totally serious. What's more, she was dead set on snatching Hyacinth and ditching this whole side if he got powers, and they sent him to war. All because Lillipy decided she'd protect her little brother, even from the royal family. So, she's willing to risk her life to escape. And the only reason she hasn't already is the hope that she can actually change something about her fate. A young man has got to decide for himself how he's going to live, stick to his own beliefs, or just follow the path the government laid out for him. Right now, Cassiel was floored by what he'd just heard and didn't know what to say. But he was sure that as soon as he got back to the academy, he'd find the answer to the question she posed. Find it with her help. Meanwhile, the coachman announced they'd arrived home. The guy got out first, and like a true gentleman, helped her down. And the young man would be really glad if, from time to time, she could knock some sense into him, if he couldn't handle it himself. In that case, she hoped Cassiel wouldn't take his anger out on her. This conversation and walk didn't end up too badly, even though the girl was expecting slightly different results. All in all, a whole month had passed since that conversation with Cassiel, and the whole time, he was showing her interest, trying to have friendly chats, which honestly wasn't all that bad. And the whole time, she never stopped searching, but she had zero luck. Time to head back to the academy. So Lillipy's back here again, on the very day she's supposed to, kick the bucket. She spent the whole trip trying to find Milia, but she just couldn't track her down. She even asked Beld about her, but the dude couldn't help her out either. Now, Lillipy realizes that Actaeon's second awakening is going to kick off after the entrance ceremony, and she doesn't want to carry that load all by herself. She spent the last few days trying to put together a list of high-level mentors at the academy. Problem is, all the top cadets are out on the front lines. She couldn't figure out why finding a way out was so hard. Why either she or Actaeon had to bite the dust. Suddenly, Cassiel noticed she looked like crap, and figured he should grab some meds from Beld for her. But she just waved him off, and they shifted their attention to Hyacinth and Actaeon. Liliopa reminded them that since she's studying here, all she needs to do is report her return. The guys were supposed to head to the entrance ceremony, and Actaeon asked if he could see her afterwards. Liliopa hesitated, knowing that Actaeon's second awakening would kick in by the end of the ceremony. So, she gave the green light for the meeting. After that, Actaeon dragged the complaining Hyacinth into the hall. Right then, Cassiel confessed that he felt like something was off. Liliopa wasn't expecting such sentimentality from him, so she pretty sternly told him to come with her to deal with paperwork. They sorted things out pretty quick, but for some reason, the girl felt drained. But she had to check in at the dorms, and then hit up the entrance ceremony. Again, she thought about Milia, who was supposed to be starting at the academy this year. There was a chance the girl was on the run, and that's bad news, since she's still an S-rank guide, and her life could be in danger. But right now, the problem was Actaeon's second awakening, which was supposed to happen today. In the original timeline, 1 A-rank guide and 2 B-rank guides managed to stabilize the guy after Liliopa bit the dust. Counting on Milia was risky too, since her second awakening happened later than everyone else because of that incident. It was tough to shake those gloomy thoughts out of her head, when suddenly, Milia appeared before her, like a ray of sunshine. Okay, things just got interesting. Liliope's been searching everywhere for this girl, and she was right here at the academy the whole time. Out of nowhere, the girl blurts out that the stones in the Garden of Oaths weren't working right. That's when Liliope started realizing the Garden of Oaths was specifically designed for abnormal awakenings. So the question is, why did people die that one time? Liliope's been missing the whole point about the suppressing stones. If they're working properly, she might actually avoid kicking the bucket. So, she told Millie to head to the admissions hall, and she'd report the stone issue to the lab. She needed to hurry and check everything out, 'cause time was running out fast. The professor was pretty surprised to see a freaked-out Liliope standing in front of her. The only thing the girl asked about was if the suppression stones in the Garden of Oaths were functioning. The question sounded super weird, especially coming from a cadet to a researcher. So, she had to make something up. Said she sensed some strange magical energy coming from the main hall. She thought these were signs of a second awakening, but they were different than usual. It was tough to buy into the woman's crazy story. Besides, only an S-rank guide could sense a magical reaction like that from this distance. Not a B rank. There was some truth to that. But the question was the senior officer ready to take responsibility for the damage from an abnormal awakening? What's more, all these signs were showing up in Actaeon Brantern. Now the researcher wasn't laughing, because this guy's second awakening was supposed to be S-rank. And here was the problem. The suppression stones were drained after the A-rank awakening that happened yesterday. At that moment, Liliopa realized that if the stones had been changed on time in the original timeline, things would have gone down differently. Good thing they at least had enough stones in reserve, and they could hurry the workers along. That's good news, and the girl was confident in her intel, so if a miracle happened, she was ready to stand by her words. Now I had to get Actaeon to the Garden of Oaths, even though she was running to her certain doom after trying to pawn off the whole guide gig on someone else the entire time. She wasn't afraid of her own possible death, but she was worried about Hyacinth's fate. I needed to pull myself together and figure out what to do before the second awakening started. It's safe to say that Actaeon, with his trust issues, won't be rushing to ask for help from others, even if he feels the signs of the second awakening. So if Liliopa sees those signs, she has to get him out of the hall. It would be awesome if everything went smoothly, unlike the original. Just then, she was hit by a surge of natural magic. But no, it was more complicated. The magic was way too aggressive, but no one else sensed it. What's worse, Liliopa noticed Actaeon's condition and was about to approach him, but Cassiel stopped her. But her gaze was fixed on Actaeon, who mouthed at her not to come closer. And that was the last thing he did before he blacked out. Liliopa couldn't wait any longer. She broke free and ran to the guy. Good thing the teachers who were nearby got to him first. It was clear the young man's awakening was off, so he needed a more thorough checkup. Overall, Liliopa was glad the teachers were working together so well, meaning there was hope for a positive outcome. Just then, her brother came up to her, saying Actaeon had been acting weird all morning. She wasn't dumb either, and had noticed the young man's condition earlier, but decided to pretend she didn't see anything. At that moment, several more people ran to help the professors who were in the hall. The girl didn't understand why all these people were fussing over the guy in the hallway. Time was already running out. Just then, cracks appeared on the restraint stone, and Actaeon's bracelet shattered into tiny pieces. This was a huge mess, so the professor told all the students still in the hall to get out of sight. Quick, because this guy's magic was totally out of control. Liliope saw the problem too. They hadn't gotten Actaeon to the Oath Garden in time, and his second awakening had already started. She knew that if she started guiding him right now, they might be able to save the kid. She didn't want to hear her little brother's arguments about not wanting her to throw her life away. So Cassiel took matters into his own hands and froze her in place. She woke up outside in the academy courtyard. Her head was pounding in the back, which meant Cassiel had knocked her out cold. Part of her understood why he did it, but another part of her was still hurt. Even so, she realized she was in the plaza in front of the main hall, where the professors and upperclassmen guides were gathered. What worried her was why the professors had called in students, since the guides had way more experience with guiding than the cadets did. But the real kicker was that the highest level guide currently at the academy was only a B rank. Just then, another professor showed up, saying Professor Hessian's magic was gone. And she was an A rank. Even she couldn't do squat against an S rank Esper. Liliopa knew how screwed they were. Actaeon's magic was all about crystallization. He could wreck everything around them. Plus, the Garden of Oaths wasn't working right now. But she couldn't just stand there, even though she felt totally hollow inside. That's when Cassiel grabbed her hand, not wanting her to run off to her doom. He begged her to just stay put and not do anything crazy, but she wasn't about to listen. She knew damn well that even in this situation, his father wouldn't call off the guides working for him. The guy knew it too. He knew a teacher had already died trying to save his brother, so he didn't get why Liliopa wanted to do the same thing. Besides, he knew exactly what could happen if she went out there. The power difference was way too big. Lilliope knew perfectly well that Actaeon's magic could kill her, but she couldn't just abandon him to his fate. Plus, Cassiel's behavior was insulting to her as a pro. That snapped the guy out of it a little, so he asked her to come back alive. If she kept her promise, he'd do anything she asked. On that note, the conversation was over. Besides, she knew guiding him was possible. Otherwise, he would have crashed and burned the first time he woke up. Maybe there was a little something between them, but even if there was, this was their chance to fix things. Meanwhile, the freshmen were just stressing about when they'd get their dorm assignments. But Milia knew the academy could turn into a total disaster zone any minute now. She was worried she might have screwed up, sending some stranger to what could be a terrible situation. Still, she felt like this time was different, because the Lilliope she met the second time was a completely different person. She figured the blonde was probably struggling with the same kind of gut-wrenching choices she was, between saving herself and someone else. But the difference between them was that Milia sent that girl to her doom, knowing the worst-case scenario. The girl kept telling herself she couldn't directly interfere. Plus, she was sure Liliopa could handle anything. Yeah, she was worried they couldn't use the Garden of Oaths at that moment, but she still thought she'd prepped the ground for Liliopa's work. But even with all that, the outcome was obvious. She put the girl's life in danger. Just then, Hyacinth came up to her, noticing Milia was shaking way too much. He tried to calm her down, saying nothing bad was happening, and even if it was, everything would be all right in the end. But Milia remembered perfectly how this same guy, after losing his only sister, turned into a cold-blooded monster whose gaze froze her soul. Looking at him now, she realized how kind he was, how much he cared about his sister, and how he was trying to reassure her and himself. The young man couldn't help but feel the girl's intense stare. She claimed he just reminded her of someone she knew. Milia was more worried than anyone because she didn't want to see this awesome guy break down again under the weight of pain and guilt. So they were both praying to every god they knew that nobody would die today. Meanwhile, Liliopa and two cadets approached the Oath Garden, replaying every detail they could remember about Actaeon's second awakening. The thing is, these guys didn't have any combat experience to speak of. At the same time, the professor explained that in a few minutes, the three of them would be entering the Oath Garden. They needed to remember that once they crossed the threshold of the building, they couldn't count on any backup. That was clear enough, so they needed to get a grip and move forward. As soon as they took their first steps inside, they saw a vortex of Actaeon's magic, filling the entire space around them. The magic was so dense, it felt like any skin it touched was about to crack. The upperclassmen decided to enter the room first and check things out. And if everything was fine for the first second, a moment later, she was thrown against the wall by a wave of Actaeon's magic. While Liliope checked on the girl, the guy freaked out and bailed, leaving them alone. Part of her understood where he was coming from. But seriously, how could he just ditch his injured buddy like that? Liliope had to tread lightly, because the guy pushes everyone away who tries to get close, knowing he's a danger to them. Once she was sure the upperclassmen could get out of there, Liliope went to find Actaeon. Meanwhile, the young dude was in really bad shape, physically and mentally, hanging on by a thread. In the Garden of Oaths, Actaeon had basically absorbed all the Academy's magical power, which turned him into a total ticking time bomb. Suddenly, in the corner, the girl saw the dead body of Professor Hessian, who'd been trying to guide him. Liliope knew if she didn't pull herself together, she'd end up the same way. But walking down those silent hallways was creepy as hell. Finally, she saw Actaeon, who wasn't going berserk and was out cold. This was even better. A chance to stabilize the guy opened up. But his mind was a total mess. Claire was aiming at him, holding Arin's dead body. That's when Liliopa realized she was seeing the guy's memories. That day, Claire gave her stepbrother a piece of advice. Actaeon should never trust the guides, because none of them could handle monsters like them. Still, she felt guilty for taking Arin from her brother, who was closer to him than his own family. After that, she pulled the trigger, saying goodbye to life. Now Actaeon's actions made sense. He'd been afraid of becoming like Claire his whole life. Her words were burned into his brain so deeply that he believed he was a monster. But that wasn't true. And Liliopa tried to get through to him. All she managed to do was unleash a magical freakout. Standing around scared wasn't an option, so she pulled herself together. She needed to get him back to normal. His mind was under attack right now. She started to approach him, But he unleashed magic, reacting to her movements. And that was just the beginning. Actaeon would keep attacking until she backed off. She should have just left while she had the chance. But she couldn't abandon Actaeon. She barely managed to get close to the guy. But he wasn't responding to anything she said. But she didn't back down, starting the guiding. She had to get a positive result through a kiss. In that moment, Liliope started seeing Actaeon's memories again. Now he was a little boy, waiting for someone. Rain was coming down hard, but the kid stubbornly waited for his mom, who'd just gotten back from the front lines. Suddenly, the woman heard the Duke's voice, a voice she knew all too well. The guy didn't show up at their place alone. He had his goons with him. He announced that the king promised him she wouldn't be sent back to war. What's worse, His Majesty was handing Actaeon's mother over to the Duke, like she was property. They had a few disagreements, but it was all settled when the guy put a ring on it. That's when Actaeon snapped and took a swing at his father. But it didn't work. His old man just kicked him away. Watching the guy's memories, Liliopa didn't get why he was showing her all this. The next memory was even worse than the last one. Actaeon's mom was captured and locked up in the Duke's mansion. They let the kid see her for an hour at a time, like she was locked up. Liliope was starting to think the Duke was a real piece of work, and his house was just as bad. Nobody talked to Actaeon. Nobody even looked at him. Day in, day out, year after year, the same thing. People treated him like he was a ghost. Even when he said goodbye to his mom for the last time, he was all alone. But one day, Aaron came to the house and immediately took an interest in the kid. But Claire didn't want Actaeon hanging around her guide. So he tried to keep his distance to avoid upsetting his sister. But Aaron wasn't about to back down. Before they knew it, they were friends. And for a little while, Actaeon was actually happy. Right up until that awful day. Liliope got it now. She understood why he showed her those memories. He's terrified of turning into a monster and taking another guide's life. Even if it wasn't his fault, the guilt was eating him alive. That's why she begged him not to push her away, so she could ease his pain. Slowly, Actaeon's magic started to calm down. But the dude's urges were just getting started. It was dawning on Liliope that this was way beyond just guiding. So she had to use her strength to get him to let go and realize what he was doing. After that, she asked Actaeon to help her up so she could go get some help. Seeing Actaeon's reaction, Liliope told him not to beat himself up too much. What happened to the professor wasn't his fault. Then Actaeon carried her out of the Oath Garden. She was blown away that she actually guided the guy. Was her crush on him that strong? Meanwhile, they didn't just patch her up. They reevaluated her level. Turns out she's not a B, she's an S. Liliope wanted to chill for a bit, obviously, but no one let her 'cause of the sudden rank up. At one point, she was completely wiped and just wanted to head back to the dorm. But no such luck. Even the professors weren't calling it a night. You can't blame them. A B-rank guide guided Actaeon, lived to tell the tale, and ranked up. The more she thought about what happened, the weirder the whole thing seemed. Even in the original story, there was nothing about Liliope's rank changing. Meanwhile, the professors were arguing about how it could have happened. Maybe the Duke's family found a way to turn regular folks into high rankers. Lililpa was amazed that such smart people could seriously discuss such utter nonsense. Seriously though, the Duke's kids are exposed to high-ranking awakened magic from a super young age. And the only way to get results like that is to be exposed to it practically since birth. But that wasn't her situation, nor was it some genetic mutation like the eggheads suggested. The most logical explanation was that she was somehow hiding her true rank. But that wasn't it, seeing as she passed out during Actaeon's guiding the first time she awakened. Plus, the idea that she was part of some kind of experiment was a bit of a stretch, right? So, they decided to wrap up the intense questioning for a bit and leave her alone. But while the professors chilled out, the students were looking at Liliopa like she was the freaking Loch Ness monster. So, all day in class, she felt like a monkey in a zoo, with everyone staring, whispering, but too afraid to come near. Just then, Cassiel came over and asked how she was doing, and all she wanted to do was crawl into bed and pass out. Truth be told, this girl's feelings about Cassiel haven't changed. He's got this arrogance about him that's just gonna lead to major beef down the line. But thinking about it, even without the attitude, she wouldn't be into him. He's too focused on her instead of his own brother. So, she wasn't feeling the conversation and just bounced. All those intense emotional reactions were a little much. But that wasn't the real issue. She knew damn well that news of her rank change was spreading like wildfire across the academy, meaning the Duke probably already knows. You just know that guy's gonna be cooking up all kinds of schemes to get her under his thumb. And he's not the only one. Actaeon's probably gonna make a move soon too, as soon as he's out of lockup. What's worse, she knows if she ends up in the same kind of situation as Actaeon's mom, things are gonna go south for him. Big time. Hell, Actaeon could even get taken out on some bogus, dangerous Esper charge. It hit her then. Liliopa's old beliefs were starting to shift. Before, all that mattered was her little brother. Lately, Actaeon's been popping up way too much, messing with her head. So, she wanted to make the guy happy, even if just for a bit. And to do that, she needed to figure out something with that control bracelet, which apparently could break down under strong Esper magic. She needed to brainstorm how to ditch that thing. Meanwhile, Actaeon was chilling in his room, all alone with his thoughts, contemplating the meaning of life. He lucked out with his isolation setup, though he knew he was probably flagged as a serious threat. Just then, the doors swung open, and the academy director walked in, the guy who held the keys to how long he'd be locked up. The kid admitted he was cool with the conditions he was in, and thanked the guy for the perks. Enough with the pleasantries. The director confessed he wasn't just there for a chat, but to check something out. Yeah, the director was about to run a guidance check on Actaeon. The guy totally understood the director's angle, but playing along would be a seriously bad move on his part. To confirm his suspicions, the director asked if the incident had somehow imprinted Cadet Liliope on the young man. The kid started denying everything, even though his actions screamed that he was dodging the question. But that wasn't it. The young man was trying to convince the guy that he was just having a hard time accepting guiding right now. But the director refused to believe him, since the reports said the guy was fine, which meant he was trying to pull a fast one. But the director's guide figured out that Actaeon probably couldn't be stabilized, since he was already maintaining an optimal state in all aspects. That was interesting, but this quirk didn't prove that imprinting hadn't happened. Either way, the kid was about to get called in by the authorities, and the investigators there would check if he was lying or not. With that, the director ended the conversation. Actaeon was happy that he'd managed to solve at least one problem. Actaeon was afraid he'd follow in his sister's footsteps, but it didn't happen, and it was all thanks to Lily. He was surprisingly stable now. Now he understood that if he felt that weird magic again, he wouldn't fly into a rage like he did at the entrance ceremony. What's more, if he spends his whole life with Liliopa, he won't turn into a monster. But he couldn't let her be forced into a life of hardship because of him. On top of that, on that fateful day, the guy unilaterally bonded with Liliopa, and the director wanted to check it out. My old man's the type who's used to exploiting awakened people for his own gain. This kind of thing wouldn't sit well with him. Everyone knows that a high-level S rank, who bonds with a specific guide, can't get guiding from other guides. For the crown, this was inefficient. If anyone found out that Actaeon unilaterally bonded with Liliopa, they'd be used as pawns in backroom deals. So, at some point, the guy was glad that the bonding was one-sided, even though nothing would have changed if it had been mutual. At the end of the day, any guide besides Liliopa wouldn't mean anything to him anyway. He remembered perfectly that she had a goal, to get out of here, so he was going to help her do it. Besides, he was sure that even if he turned into a monster, Liliopa wouldn't abandon him and would come to save him. So he planned to hide the mark for the rest of his life, 'cause he never wanted to force a girl into anything. But just as he made that decision, fate threw them together again. She dragged him to a secluded spot where nobody ever goes, to talk. It was kinda awkward, considering how close they were standing. The girl knew the young dude was probably uncomfortable being around her, since they'd been making out just a few days ago. So she decided to steer the conversation to safer waters, asking if his isolation was over. Turns out, if he doesn't stir up any trouble, he's free to study at the academy. But Liliope didn't share his good mood, 'cause she knew someone tried to off him at the entrance ceremony. She was trying to get through to him that someone was trying to kill him. But Actaeon already knew that perfectly well, and who was behind it. He saw the surprise on her face, 'cause she thought he was totally clueless. But he's not an idiot, you know? Like everyone thinks the Duke's backing Sibylline. But aligning with their house is actually a bad move for His Highness. Suddenly, Liliopa realized that in the novel, Actaeon got revenge on everyone, not just for his mom, but for himself. 'Cause in the book, Prince Sibylline was the one who started the war in the first place. He used her as a convenient tool to rally his allies around him. In the novel, the messed up Actaeon's second awakening, then pretended to protect him to get him on his side. Same thing happened with Hyacinth, who he got rid of after he'd served his purpose. He even helped Actaeon become the head of the house. But the guy figured out his twisted scheme and took him out. But that wasn't the end of the story. The aristocratic faction was still around, and they were not happy with how things were going. Right around the same time, Prince Isidore went missing. Poof! Nobody was stepping up to take charge, so the aristocrats seized control of the kingdom, and that's when all hell broke loose. So, against the backdrop of everyone else's suffering, Actaeon and Millie's happiness just felt wrong. Before all this went down, Liliana didn't get Actaeon, but now it all clicks. Like, the whole kingdom's to blame for what happened to him. That's why he wasn't just after his dad and the crown prince. He was out for revenge on the whole damn country. His question snapped her out of her thoughts. He was wondering if she'd ask how he came to that conclusion. But Liliop didn't need the obvious explained to her. See, when Liliop woke up, she didn't just feel his emotions, she saw his memories too. It was pretty intense, but Actaeon was hoping she wouldn't go running to the school admins about it. But he didn't mind her doing it, as opposed to anyone else. Actaeon's words and actions stirred up some unexpected warm feelings in Liliopa's heart. Just then, Milia was hurrying towards them, so Liliopa told Actaeon to duck around the corner. Milia accidentally found out about this place. Sometimes when she needs a little peace, she comes here. That made sense, but Liliopa had a question for the girl. She wanted to figure out why Pinky wasn't surprised when Lily called her by name when they first met. Plus, she knew there were issues with the stones, and even warned her about it. Milia was shaking, saying she didn't want to lie to Liliopa, but she couldn't exactly spill all the beans either. Even so, she would help Liliopa in any way she possibly could. After that, the girl ran off, and Actaeon came out of hiding, bummed that he and Lily got interrupted. Plus, the professor had called Liliope in, but the guy believed they still had plenty of time to hang out together. Turns out, the professor had some not-so-great news. The crown prince wanted to have a word with her, but they couldn't just ignore that, so she and Actaeon headed to the capital. Before that, though, she learned from Cassiel that Actaeon was also summoned, and the Duke found out, so he asked them to stop by the mansion first. Sibylan probably wants to get her on his side, that's why he called her in, which also meant the guy would leave Hyacinth alone for a while. But it'd be naive to think the crown prince wouldn't find a way to get what he wants. Either way, she'd find out soon enough. But for now, it was time to leave the train station. But when they got to the meeting spot in the square, there was no carriage to be seen. This had to be some kind of power play by Sibylline, but he sure didn't forget to send some watchers after them. That's when she got an idea on how to really stick it to His Highness. Actaeon knew right away what she was getting at. They could stir things up right now. They exchanged a knowing look, plotting something wicked. So they split up, and right before the show started, Liliopa took the Nexum. The spy chased the girl to the alleyway and froze. She was gone. No surprise there, since she was attacking him from the other side. Let's just say his pride was hurt, and he was feeling pretty embarrassed. She was racking her brain, trying to figure out who sent these guys to Taylor. Her words totally got under his skin, especially since he couldn't tell her he was working for Sibylline. On top of everything else, she decided to use magic, call the guards, hand over the perp in the Duke's name, and generally mess with him and the prince. But things went sideways, and the guy managed to break free. Liliopa chased after him, realizing the shooter was trying to mind control Actaeon. So now she has to catch the guy she let get away. They had to run a bit, but Actaeon and Liliopa managed to nab the spies. Once it was all over, the enemies were caught, and she realized she'd been way too reckless. She just wanted to call the guards. But Actaeon had to use his magic because of her. Now his magic flow is all messed up. That's why she told him to lay off the magic, so he doesn't get burned out. Just then, the guy noticed they were surrounded, probably by people from the administration. He was right on the money. First aid's gonna be available ASAP. It's wild that one of the spies used a gun, knowing the rank of the guy and girl. Okay, so he wasn't aiming for anything vital, but he still pulled the trigger. Which means, no matter how banged up Liliope and Actaeon get, the important thing is they don't die. Meanwhile, the cops showed up, wanting to know one thing. What the heck happened here? Turns out, it was an old acquaintance of the girls. The same guy who handled her case when the Count got attacked, and then later when Actaeon first woke up. This was the third time he'd been called out because of her, so he was going to give her a minute to collect herself and spill the beans. Lillipe, without missing a beat, accused the guys of being spies, saying they noticed their shady moves back in the square. She claimed the dudes were trying to get close to Actaeon, but when they got spotted, they tried to bolt, and she nabbed them. So, she and the young man were just defending themselves, but the cop wasn't buying it so easy. He was getting some serious déjà vu vibes. Still, he couldn't just ignore the situation, so he arrested the people accused of espionage. He couldn't just let Lillipe off the hook, not after this being her third stunt like this. But she wasn't worried in the slightest, and was trying to calm Actaeon down, since all this was new to him. After a while, Isidore showed up to bail Lillipe out of jail again. The girl felt terrible that she hadn't lived up to His Highness's expectations, who hadn't expected such a ruckus from her. Okay, he was used to the girl's behavior, but why hadn't Actaeon stopped her? He's supposed to be a level-headed young man, yet he got mixed up in this crazy scheme. Actaeon, on the other hand, fully supported Lillipe because he didn't see her actions as impulsive. On the contrary, he admired how well thought out they were. The prince had come to terms with that, but he was annoyed that the guys seemed unhappy even after he helped them. Meanwhile, they were driving down one of the city streets and noticed a picket line of citizens protesting the war. The protests were getting more aggressive every day, so people were starting to realize that the control stones had only brought discord to the country. We could pretend the world wasn't falling apart and no one was going to save it, but what's the point? Sadly, Lillipe's going to become part of this whole mess pretty soon. But get this! His Highness was totally chill riding along, acting like the protesters didn't exist. At the same time, Isidore couldn't miss the fact that Actaeon had questions for him. Questions he couldn't answer. All he could do was hope Actaeon would be reasonable and understanding. The girl suddenly noticed how hostile these two guys were towards each other. Did Actaeon pick up on something fishy about His Highness? And that's saying something, because Isidore didn't seem like a bad dude, really. Yeah, he was a smooth talker, which rubbed some people the wrong way. Even now, it was hard to tell what the prince meant. Did he think the protesters were right or not? Everything he said had a hidden meaning, so if he keeps acting like this, it's going to be tough to get on the same page. He's all buddy-buddy with Lillipe, but he keeps giving her reasons to doubt him. Digging into his background might be the right move. Help us understand what makes him tick. Before long, they arrived at the palace and headed towards the crown prince. She looked around, remembering bits and pieces from the kingdom's history. That's when Isidore chimed in, saying he got them there safe and sound, but now he's got a jet. Lillipe thanked him for the favor and his help. Besides, the guy was curious to be involved. He owed her one anyway. That look on his face was seriously weird and hard to figure out. Then he leaned in close to Actaeon's ear and whispered something so Lillipe wouldn't hear. That's a twist. But Actaeon wasn't about to fall for His Highness's words or his games. On top of that, the kid was seriously pissed. He didn't come here to be some prince's lapdog. Just then, Isidora's right-hand man called her over. Business was calling after all, so she left the young guys to it. The whole thing was weird. Isidora had never shown any hostility towards people before, but this was a total overreaction. At that moment, she noticed the guy was clearly uncomfortable. The reason? There was practically no magic power here, or it was seriously depleted. So, she decided to give the guy a little help, loosening his tie a bit. But he was totally digging it. He wouldn't mind Lillipe fixing his tie every day. Right then, the crown prince's assistant came out to them and asked them to follow him. As they walked through the castle corridors, all eyes were on them. And now, the moment of truth. They were standing before the crown prince. They bowed their heads before him, watching the man confer with his assistant. Once they were allowed to look up, Lillipe turned on the charm, thanking the man for the honor he bestowed upon them. The man cut straight to the chase. He knew her brother was under the Duke's protection, but her status would soon change too, so he offered his patronage. Lillipe, however, felt that such an honor from His Highness would be far too great for her. After that, Sibelin shifted his attention to Actaeon and asked what it felt like during stabilization. The young man didn't try to hide anything, saying he couldn't put the range of emotions he experienced into words. Now, that was interesting. So the prince ordered Organ to remove their bracelets. The man wanted to test Actaeon's powers in real time. Lillipe didn't like this proposal, because she understood that His Highness just wanted to have some fun at their expense and entertain the nobles. To them, they're not people, just lab rats. So the guy decided to start with Actaeon. The problem was, the mana in the palace was drained, meaning controlling the flow would be a total pain. Since the kid wasn't exactly jumping to start the show, Sibylline started pushing his buttons. And judging by the look on the guy's face, the prince totally got under his skin. You could hear a pin drop in the hall. The courtiers were all over them, saying they should get on with His Highness's order. Actaeon just smirked and said he'd lost his cool for a sec. But unfortunately, he was gonna have to let the prince down. Meanwhile, Liliopa was keeping an eye on the guy, knowing how quick he could get riled up. Then, Actaeon finally summoned his magic. Obviously, he didn't show everything he had, which kinda bummed out the crown prince since he was expecting way more. Still, that was enough to get him sent to the battlefield. The kid decided to play to the crowd, faking a dizzy spell and loss of control over his magic. The audience wasn't expecting that kind of twist, or that he'd deliberately lose control and smash the palace windows. Everyone in the hall freaked out like little kids at that moment. The girl could totally see he was faking, so he could have at least given her a little scratch to make it believable. The funny thing is, during his second awakening, his power was unstable, and controlling mana was almost impossible. But now he's handling it perfectly without the bracelet. Meanwhile, back at the castle, everyone was screaming, running around, and begging someone to stop Actaeon. That's when she asked him why he wasn't calling it quits on his little one-man show. But Actaeon stayed silent, and Liliope decided to play along too, pretending she couldn't stabilize him, which basically means she's not up to the crown prince's standards, so she's just not good enough for him. To stop Actaeon's rampage, Oregon had to get close and slap that bracelet on him. Basically, what they did was seen as an attack on the crown prince, so they got hauled in for questioning and temporary lockup. 3 days flew by without a peep. And then, bam, they were sprung. She was worried Actaeon was hurting after that whole 72-hour loyalty drill. Liliopa also knew that the crown prince's ego was off the charts. So, they called the whole thing an accident, making sure nobody ever found out he got beat by some awakened dude. Which means we can expect payback soon, especially after they turned down his help in such a rude way. Just then, Actaeon suddenly dropped his head on her shoulder. He was stoked to know the girl actually cared about him, but she pushed him away, said he was a bad boy who wouldn't listen to Aunt Lilipop. The guy admitted he thought he could get away with something, so he did what he did. But that's all water under the bridge now, 'cause the girl's about to learn some stuff about his dad. It was tough to guess what the Duke would do, whether he'd throw down the gauntlet at the crown prince. More likely he'll just ghost her, not try to stir up any extra drama. All just speculation at this point though, so no use guessing what's gonna happen. We'll find out when the time comes. Except the Duke's offer totally blew Lilipop's mind. He asked her to consider getting engaged. Question is, who's getting hitched to who, and when's the big day? Now the girl was wondering how the Duke could so openly oppose Sibylline, and what his reasons were. Why the heck was the Duke's house in such a precarious position? I mean, the Duke's house was famous for its long history of loyal service to the crown. The current Duke didn't have enough influence, so he even sent his own daughter to the battlefield. Sibylline knew perfectly well that one day the Duke would betray him, and he was scared of that. And right in the middle of all this maneuvering was Liliopa, who openly refused the crown prince. So the trouble she stirred up was a real gift for Glock. Nevertheless, she knew she had to keep her cool, because the Duke was part of Sibylline's faction and supported him. The Duke was one of those espers who could stand toe-to-toe with opponents from the neighboring kingdom. Liliopa understood that, for now, she had to be extremely careful about what she said, so as not to reveal her plans. Right then, the conversation swung back to the engagement. Actaeon said if he was going to agree to something like that, it'd be his choice, not the family's. Liliopa couldn't be that blunt, or refuse the Duke outright, so she tried to make him doubt she was a good choice for a daughter-in-law. Plus, no one had ever recorded a third awakening before, so it was tough to draw any conclusions about her. Still, Glock wasn't backing down. He was willing to give the girl time to think it over until she graduated from the academy. Until then, he planned to dig up as much information as he could about this third awakening. What's more, he was letting Liliopa pick one of his sons to be her future husband. That offer was seriously unwelcome, because she definitely wasn't thinking about Cassiel like that. The old man saw her hesitation and hinted that she'd be better off choosing Actaeon. Actaeon, on the other hand, wasn't about to pressure the girl at all, unlike his dad. That's when the Duke gave his son some advice. Stick close to the girl, and she'll cave. That's how Siona became the lady of this house. Gloka clearly didn't sweat his wife not coming down today. He figured the head maid was taking care of her, so no worries. After dinner, the girl headed back to her room, totally baffled how the Crown Prince and Gloka could be such terrible dudes. Liliopa couldn't wrap her head around how the Duke could be so chill with the Crown Prince sending Actaeon off to war. Just then, her thoughts were interrupted by a maid slipping her a secret message. And here's another head-scratcher. Why the head maid was passing her a note and telling her to keep it on the down low. It was a note from the Duchess, asking to meet at midnight. Liliopa was itching to know what Siona wanted from her, so she started her little trek to her chambers. So far, she was managing to dodge the staff patrolling the floors. And just like that, the girl reached the Duchess's chambers, which were way too dark. Honestly, the place was way too gloomy for a woman's room, and the smell was harsh and weird. The woman started by apologizing for calling Lily over in the middle of the night. Surprisingly, she wanted to talk about the Duke and his obsessive need to get Lily into their family. Liliopa immediately figured the woman was trying to talk her out of it. She didn't deny it, saying this house was like a swamp you can't escape. Like that girl who could have been her daughter's friend. She passed away. And even her kind, honest boy is becoming more and more like his father every day. It's sad to see Cassiel losing his way. But lately, even he's been changing for the better. That's all thanks to Liliopa, just like how Actaeon's been coming back to life recently. So today, she didn't want the girl to get mixed up with the Duke's house. Besides, Siona was sure that the dukedom would soon be circling the drain. Liliopa thanked the woman for her honesty, and now she saw they were in the same boat. That was a win, especially since the girl sparked a major beef between the dukedom and the Crown Prince. Even if she didn't mean to cause this, she lit the fuse that blew up between these heavy hitters. The women started hammering out the terms of their deal, and the Duchess promised to do everything she could for the girl. But some things were out of her hands. Obviously, they needed to get her a new ID and figure out how to get her out of here, because sticking around would be way too risky. But the Duchess had to understand that Liliopa's priority was her brother, so his safety always came first. Siona heard her loud and clear and swore she'd protect Hyacinth at all costs. With that, the conversation wrapped up, and Liliopa turned to leave. Just then, she spotted someone in a cloak in the hallway, someone who definitely shouldn't be there. She recognized the scent. It was Beld. The big question was, where the heck had the pharmacist been, showing up at the mansion this late at night? Morning hit, and Liliopa felt like crap after tailing Beld all night. It just hit her that she's got to be way more careful now that she's sided with the Duchess. First observation. The pharmacist's pretty skilled, so he whips up almost all the meds for the Duke's family and household. That means he's basically their doctor too, giving him access to every room, free to roam the whole damn place. Hopefully he's on the Duchess's side, but who knows for sure. It could be the complete opposite. He could be spying on all of them for the Duke. And since she doesn't know what kind of guy Beld really is, it's tough to jump to any conclusions. Now, since Liliopa's heading back to the academy tomorrow, she needs to keep an eye on that pharmacist today. Just then, the head maid showed up. Turns out, Siona invited her for tea in the garden. The woman wanted to discuss some intel with the girl, which meant she could also ask if Beld was an ally or an enemy. Except, they'd probably never get a chance to talk shop with Actaeon hanging around at tea. He was dressed to the nines and beaming like a spotlight. Turns out, the dude was there as Siona's informant on the girl's taste preferences. But the pleasantries ended right there, as the Duchess confessed she'd invited the girl to her chambers that night. Actaeon paused for a second, but at the same time, he was relieved he didn't have to keep the secret from her anymore. Actually, Siona was one step ahead of him, because he was planning to lay all his cards on the table pretty soon, too. At that moment, the girl felt like a total third wheel, since she had no idea what was going on. Just then, Beld walked up to them and asked if he could steal Liliopa for a sec, because he needed to give her something. It was a vial of medicine that needed to be delivered to Cashel. Before heading off to the academy, the pharmacist gave the kid the same medicine, but he's probably run out by now, so he needs a refill. Then, out of nowhere, he changes the subject, saying he's heard about all the trouble Action and Liliopa stirred up in town. The girl didn't deny it, but she also didn't want to get into it any further. Hearing that, the guy didn't stick around any longer, since he had other stuff to do. Meanwhile, Siona suggested Action continue their fascinating conversation. Night fell, and Liliopa finally decided to keep tabs on Beld. But she wasn't the only one who wanted to dig up a little more dirt on the guy. and her unexpected helper turned out to be Action, who she tackled to the ground when he snuck up behind her. Liliopa froze, staring down at Action sprawled on the ground. The guy was embarrassed and asked her to get off him, if she wouldn't mind. The guy's get-up in that mask just screamed shady, like he wasn't just out for a stroll. It was obvious he was tailing someone, but he was being way too obvious about it, so she decided to tweak his disguise a bit, seeing as she used to be a thief and knew a thing or two about blending in. But he didn't need to worry about her spilling the beans. Those days were long gone. Action got that. But what he didn't get was how she managed to keep her cool, like when they met the Crown Prince. He'd wanted to off him right then and there, but he held back because he didn't want to give them any more reason to treat the Awakened even worse than they already do. Truth be told, Liliopa felt the same way he did, but after going through one hell of an ordeal, she realized nothing lasts forever. Everything changes, so now she's playing the waiting game. Her words made sense, especially considering the miracles that had happened, things Action never thought possible. Liliope suddenly realized she hadn't even asked the guy who he was tailing. Turns out, Beld's been sneaking out at night a lot, and the Duchess asked Action to keep an eye on him. Hardly anything was known about him either. Just one day the Duke brought him home, and that was it. I'm curious, obviously trust is trust, but there was probably something else that made the Duke bring that guy into his house. Soon Beld arrived at a shady spot. Liliope figured it was a place where they buy, fix, and sell weapons off the books. Action took a sniff. He caught the scent of gunpowder and herbs, too. Just then, bits and pieces of the conversation inside started drifting their way, and Liliope was shocked when she recognized Prince Isidore as the other voice. The guys were talking about the Duke's mansion and Action, who had only recently awakened, and even though Beld didn't like it, he knew this day would come. Meanwhile, Action was smirking strangely as he listened. All in all, the prince was happy with how things were going, seeing as Action hadn't lost it. But then, the guy suddenly walked up to the window and threw it open. He didn't see anyone, even though he figured Beld had probably brought some unwanted company. Meanwhile, Action was holding Liliope close, shielding her from the prince and from danger. The dude did the right thing, but why isn't he looking Liliope in the eyes? That's the real question. Suddenly, the kids overheard that Modin was about to get drafted, so the guys were getting ready to start training. And that's when Sibelian will throw anyone he doesn't like right into the thick of it. That's why the, problem was perfect for their plan, because until it's discovered, it can't be stopped. Just then, the girl overheard something else that made her realize she'd been used to take out Earl Lorraine. The Crown Prince had taken over his business, and Isidore had started his own game. She thought she was calling the shots, that she could change things, but she'd been played for a fool. But that wasn't all the revelations for today. Turns out, Isidore has a soft spot for Liliope. He even feels like she's become a little sister to him. Beld breathed a sigh of relief. Good thing the prince didn't fall for her. And then the signal cut out. Liliope couldn't hear a thing. Action heard something though, but he didn't tell her, just said they needed to leave. What's more, it looked like his face was twisted with fear. A new day dawned, and they returned to the academy. But before leaving, Beld stopped her, and even sent the maids away so they could talk. But as soon as Action approached them, the man backed away from her, practically screaming how awkward he felt. She was clearly missing something important in the man's behavior. There was a reason he was staying in the same house as the Duchess. And let's not forget about the army draft. She's at least had some training at the academy, but Action's totally green. Plus, she had to report in about her arrival, and this time she was definitely going to face the music. But the chat with the professor wasn't as bad as she thought. She was just glad the girl made it back to the academy, safe and sound. There was no point in yelling at Liliope, but the professor couldn't hide her disappointment. It felt weird knowing the professor cared about her, especially since she'd sent so many others to the front lines before. Just then, Hyacinth walked up to Liliope. The professor had called him in for a talk. Hugging her brother reminded her that she needed to get that medicine to Cassiel. Except, according to Hyacinth, that wasn't going to be easy. Right now, the guy was in hot water for openly speaking out against the war in history class. Liliope glanced around, hoping nobody was close enough to hear. Then again, she figured Cassiel was definitely somewhere nearby, buried in a book. They punished him, made him rewrite stuff and write long reports, all to reform him, to make him renounce his questionable beliefs. He's locked in a room near the library until he realizes he's wrong. But if Liliope wants to see someone, she'll find a way, even if it's weird or risky. Part of her knew she shouldn't get involved in this guy's problems, but she couldn't just leave him hanging. He needs his medicine, and she's gonna get it to him. Okay, she's almost there. Just gotta open the window and get inside. Just then, Cassiel opened the window himself. The guy was stunned, because he knew damn well it was impossible to just waltz into this building. He tried to play it cool, like he wasn't rewriting reports, just cooling off, and that he'd be out of here soon anyway. But Liliope wasn't buying it. After all, this guy can't control his temper. So, she gave him the sedative from Belletta. Plus, she wanted to find out how to get this restriction bracelet off. Only now did it hit her that she screwed up, because for him, dislocation could be a trigger. And yeah, Cassiel's face changed, realizing the Crown Prince was probably behind the girl's request. Man, he wished he could go back to when he didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. Tears streamed down his face, because the same thing that happened to Claire was gonna happen to Liliope. They're the same rank. It hurt so damn bad right now. He didn't want to lose her. She had to live. Liliope tried to calm him down, saying even if she managed to escape, she'd be hunted for the rest of her life. And anyone who helped her would spend their lives under the authorities' microscope. Besides, sooner or later, the war will end, and she'd like to live to see it. She had a point, especially about needing to ditch that control stone. He'd gathered intel on the control stone and kept it at his place, so he'd hand it over as soon as he finished his situation. That was good news. Plus, she promised the guy she wouldn't kick the bucket. Time passed, and Actaeon and Liliope headed to Ramdia. The day before, she'd had a major blow-up with Hyacinth, who found out about her draft notice from someone else. Actaeon sensed her distress, so he tried to calm her down. He knew Hyacinth loved her a lot, so he wouldn't stay mad forever, and probably already forgave her. Just then, a guy approached them, radiating danger and hostility. Soon, they arrived at their destination. Man, was it hot! Sweat was pouring off him. He wanted to give Sibylline a piece of his mind, wish some bad karma on him. Liliope remembered how the commander acted like a stuck-up jerk the whole train ride. Then the train tracks got wrecked, and all the recruits had to grab their packs and start hoofing it. We were stuck eating just the rations we'd packed for days. Everyone was wondering when we'd finally reach camp. Even Actaeon was looking rough. Right then, the commander started bugging Liliope again, saying he and His Highness were counting on them. Man, she was so close to wanting to, well, let's just say she wanted to shut Sibylline up permanently, and she knew her day would come. Finally, they were at the camp. Now, they just needed to find their tent and catch their breath. But to avoid any screw-ups, Liliope decided to double-check things. She was right. She found the awakened tent right away, but the attitude from the higher-ups was weird and stuck up. Mitchell got stuck showing them around the camp, and he didn't look thrilled about it. As soon as the guy heard their names, he got all thoughtful. He was wondering what Actaeon knew about this place, but then he snapped out of it and told them to forget he said anything. Basically, this squad is made up of awakened individuals who specialize in black ops. The newbies got sleeping bags so they could crash tonight, since things should be quiet for now. Mitchell figured these guys probably hadn't slept the whole trip here. After getting their bags, the guy and girl could get some shut-eye, and then they could talk more about the situation later. After that, the guy rushed off to play cards with his buddies, but Liliope wondered why those guys just gave up. When did life for the awakened get so completely messed up? Night fell. Everyone was asleep, when suddenly Actaeon sensed foreign mana and started waking up his comrades. It was an attack, so the awakened had to move out with the soldiers. But when Liliope left the tent, she realized the camp was way too quiet. She didn't get why only their squad was involved in this night raid. Mitchell explained that they were under attack by the awakened empire of Oskal. More precisely, it's probably just one guy, and that's the necromancer. And the problem is, his mana can control the dead. We're going to be seeing dead animals and soldiers, so we can't let our guard down. The situation sucked. Liliope didn't understand why the cadets had to go through this. Just then, Mitchell called everyone over to take off their control bracelets. Once he takes them off, hide your bracelet and don't lose it, or you'll get disciplined. Then everything happened fast. Liliope barely got a sip of Nexum before the first zombie attacked her. She got lucky, because Actaeon was faster and took down the monster before it could hurt her. She returned the favor and covered Actaeon's back. So that was their plan, watching each other's backs in the fight. But then they noticed almost everyone in the squad was barely using any magic. just fighting off the zombies the old-fashioned way, which was super weird. I mean, they taught us at the academy to use magic in situations like this, but something's up. Though, regular soldiers probably stopped going on these missions, since the awakened ones handle the main stuff now. Things on the battlefield have gotten intense, depending on what rank of awakened gets sent in as backup. And if they're not using magic now, it means there's something way worse than these zombies out there. And to figure out what it is, we gotta finish this fight. All in all, the guy and the girl were working together like a well-oiled machine. But it was time to wrap this battle up, and Actaeon decided to take charge. What he did next looked totally insane to everyone else. He wiped out that zombie horde with one attack, totally blew everyone's minds with his power. Even the enemy stopped using magic. The other awakened guys started gossiping about Actaeon, bringing up Claire again. A few minutes later, the kid announced that there weren't any more enemies around. Mitchell could see that for himself, since the kid had taken them all out solo. Just then, Actaeon noticed Mitchell giving him a weird look and asked what that was about. But the guy didn't answer, just ordered everyone to put on their bracelets and head to the barracks to get some sleep. Actaeon and Liliope put on their bracelets, figuring there were probably reasons why everyone was being so careful with their magic. After that first fight, there were a few more attacks over the next few days. The necromancer didn't show his face again, but the enemies kept trying to figure out Actaeon's limits. The kid was good at playing them, so they quieted down pretty quick. The guys in the squad were even telling him to take it easy, saying they'd still praise and love him even if he didn't go all out.